Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today, we're diving into a story full of twists and turns as love and family clash with difficult choices. What happens when a powerful mother tries to control her son's love life, and the son is ready to fight for his own family? Will the CEO's decision to stand by his partner tear apart the family, or will it bring them closer together? Stay tuned to find out. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of the drama ahead. After a long and tiring day of dealing with the gangsters, the CEO finally arrived home, his body aching from the confrontation. The evening had been chaotic, filled with uncertainty, and even though the physical fight was over, the emotional toll weighed heavily on him. As he walked into their apartment, he was greeted by a quiet sense of peace. The moment he stepped inside, he immediately felt the difference, a warmth that had been missing from the outside world. He looked at the dining table where Tieu Lac had set out a simple meal. She was sitting there, waiting for him, her expression calm, yet filled with concern. The light from the overhead lamp cast a soft glow over the room, and he could see the little details that had always made their home feel warm. But tonight, everything felt a little different. It was as if the weight of everything that had happened in the past few days had somehow made everything feel more real. Tieu Lac smiled softly when she saw him walk in. "You're home," she said, her voice full of quiet relief. "I've been waiting for you." The CEO smiled back, though it was more tired than usual. He hadn't realized how much he had missed this, the simplicity of sitting down for a meal, the comfort of being with her. "Sorry I'm late," he replied, his voice carrying the fatigue of the day. "I got caught up with some business, but I'm here now." He sat down at the table, noticing the small, thoughtful gestures she had made for the meal. Despite everything, Tieu Lac had prepared a simple dinner, a gesture of normalcy in the midst of the chaos. The CEO felt a sense of gratitude well up inside him, but it was mixed with something else. A deep feeling of guilt and responsibility. She looked at him, her eyes filled with concern. "Are you all right? You look exhausted." The CEO nodded, but the weariness was obvious in his posture. "I'm fine, it's been a long day," he said, his voice trailing off. Tieu Lac didn't press him, but she could tell something was on his mind. They had both been through so much, and now, with the gangsters still lurking in the background, things felt uncertain. She had hoped the worst was behind them, but she wasn't sure anymore. As much as she wanted to believe that they could finally live in peace, the reality of their situation was much more complex. The baby, who had been asleep in her crib, stirred slightly, and Tieu Lac excused herself to check on her. The CEO watched her go, his heart full of love for both of them. As he sat there alone at the table, he looked around their home, feeling the weight of the decisions he had made. He had promised Tieu Lac a better life, one where they could live without fear. But the world outside seemed determined to keep pulling them back into the chaos. As Tieu Lac returned with the baby in her arms, she sat down beside him, offering him a soft smile. The baby let out a tiny yawn, her little hands waving in the air, as if everything in her world was simple and carefree. The CEO couldn't help but smile at the sight. There was something so pure about the way the baby looked at the world, so innocent and unaware of the dangers around her. He leaned over to kiss the baby's forehead gently before looking back at Tieu Lac. "I'm going to work harder for you both. I promise," he said quietly, his voice filled with determination. Tieu Lac nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. "I know you will," she replied, placing the baby back in the crib. "We're in this together." The CEO felt a sense of relief wash over him. In the midst of everything, he had her by his side. They had each other, and that was the most important thing. But there was still so much uncertainty. The gangsters were still out there, and his mother, his powerful mother, had yet to be dealt with. Just as he was starting to settle into a moment of calm, his phone buzzed on the table. The CEO reached for it, already knowing who it was. His mother's name flashed on the screen. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello, Mom," he said, his voice steady, though the weight of the conversation was already pressing down on him. "Don't think I haven't noticed what's been happening." His mother's voice came through the phone, sharp and clear. "I've heard about the incident with the gangsters. What do you think you're doing, acting without consulting me?" The CEO clenched his jaw. He had been expecting this. "It's nothing to worry about. I handled it." There was a long pause on the other end before his mother spoke again. "Handled it? Do you think that's enough? You've put yourself, your family, and everything I've worked for at risk, and now you expect me to just let this go?" "I did what I had to do, Mom," the CEO replied, trying to keep his voice calm. "I won't apologize for protecting my family." His mother's tone softened, but only slightly. "You think this is over? You think you can keep making decisions without involving me? I know you're trying to be the hero, but you're not invincible, son. You're not alone in this." The CEO felt his patience thinning. "I never asked for your approval, Mom. I've made my decisions, and I'll continue to make them." His mother sighed, as if weighing her options. "Fine, but we need to talk tomorrow. There's a lot more at stake here than you realize." "I'll be ready," the CEO said, his voice steady, though his mind was already spinning. He knew this meeting with his mother would be another battle, but he wasn't about to back down now. As he hung up the phone, he turned to Tieu Lac. "I'll handle this tomorrow," he said quietly, his expression unreadable. "But I won't let her interfere with our life." Tieu Lac nodded, but a look of concern crossed her face. "Just be careful," she said softly. "Your mother doesn't back down easily." The CEO looked at her, his expression softening. "I know, but this time I'm standing my ground. For us." Later that evening, as the CEO lay in bed, the weight of the conversation with his mother still lingered in his mind. The next day would be crucial. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew it was time to put everything on the line. He turned to Tieu Lac, who was resting beside him, her eyes closed. "I won't let her tear us apart," he whispered to himself. And with that, he drifted off to sleep, the uncertainty of tomorrow weighing heavily on his mind. The morning came too quickly for the CEO, and the weight of the conversation with his mother hung heavy over him. He had already prepared himself for the inevitable confrontation, but the pressure of it all was starting to settle in. He had promised Tieu Lac that he would protect their family, but how could he do that when the very person who should be supporting him was actively trying to tear it apart? As he sat at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee, his thoughts were consumed with the upcoming meeting. Tieu Lac, noticing his silence, walked over and sat next to him. Her presence was always calming, and despite the turmoil in his mind, she had a way of grounding him. "You don't have to do this, you know," she said softly, her voice filled with concern. "You don't have to prove anything to her." The CEO looked at her, his eyes softening. "It's not about proving anything. It's about protecting our future, Tieu Lac. She's always tried to control everything, but this time, I'm not backing down. I have to make sure we're safe, for us and our baby." Tieu Lac nodded, squeezing his hand gently. "I believe in you. Whatever happens, we're in this together." Her words gave him strength, but the truth was, he wasn't sure what would happen when he faced his mother. He had fought for so much in his life, but fighting his own family, fighting the very person who had raised him, was something entirely different. As the day wore on, the CEO prepared himself for the meeting. He dressed carefully, knowing that this wasn't just another business discussion. It was a battle for his family's future. The drive to his mother's house felt long, each mile ticking away the seconds until the inevitable confrontation. He was calm on the outside, but inside the tension was building. Tieu Lac stayed behind at the apartment, trusting him to handle things, but the worry in her eyes stayed with him. He could feel the weight of her concern, and it made him all the more determined to stand strong. When he arrived at his mother's house, he was greeted with the cold silence he had come to expect. His mother, as always, was composed, her posture regal as she sat at the large dining table. There was no warmth in her smile, no invitation in her gaze. She was prepared, and she was waiting for him to make his move. "Sit down, son," she said coolly, her voice carrying the weight of authority. The CEO sat across from her, his posture rigid. The tension was palpable. "I'm here," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Let's get this over with." His mother didn't waste time. "I know what you've been doing, and I won't stand by and watch you destroy everything I've worked for. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking perfectly fine," he replied, his voice steady. "I'm doing what I believe is right for my family." "You're putting everything at risk," his mother snapped. "You're letting that woman control you, and for what? You think she'll be there for you when things get tough." His mother's words were sharp, meant to provoke him, but the CEO was prepared. He had heard these criticisms all his life, but this time they didn't have the same effect. "Tieu Lac is my partner," he said, his voice unwavering. "I'm not doing this for her alone. I'm doing this for us, for our family. And if you can't accept that, then I don't know what to say." The mother's eyes narrowed, the tension between them palpable. "You think this is about just you and her? This is about the future of the company. You've lost sight of everything that matters." "I haven't lost sight of anything," the CEO replied, leaning forward. "This is about more than just business. This is about my life, and I won't let you or anyone else dictate it." The mother's eyes softened for a moment, but there was still an edge to her voice. "You're making a mistake, son. I'm trying to help you. You can't just throw everything away. You've worked too hard to give it all up for her." "I'm not throwing anything away," the CEO said firmly. "I'm building something better, and I'm doing it on my own terms." For a moment, they were both silent, the weight of their words hanging in the air. The CEO felt the familiar pressure of his mother's gaze, but he wasn't backing down. This was the decision he had made. This was his family. Finally, his mother spoke again, her tone measured but still heavy with concern. "I don't understand you, son. I don't understand why you're willing to throw it all away for a woman who isn't even part of this world." "Maybe I'm not the person you want me to be," the CEO said, his voice calm but firm. "But I'm the person I need to be, and I'm not going to apologize for that." His mother sighed, looking tired, as though the weight of their conversation had drained her. "You're my son, and I love you. But I can't accept this. Not yet." The CEO didn't know what else to say. He had hoped that his mother would understand, but it seemed like that wasn't going to happen. There was too much between them, too much history for her to accept him as he was. As the meeting ended, the CEO left his mother's house, his mind still racing. He had made his decision, but it hadn't been easy. His mother hadn't agreed, but he wasn't surprised. He knew this would be a long battle, but he wasn't backing down. He had Tieu Lac and their child to protect, and that meant more than any company or family legacy. As he drove back to the apartment, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Tieu Lac. "How did it go?" He sighed, his fingers gripping the steering wheel tightly. "It went as expected," he replied. "She's not happy, but I'll handle it. Don't worry." Tieu Lac's response was quick. "I trust you." The CEO smiled slightly, the tension easing just a little. As he pulled into the driveway of their apartment building, he knew the road ahead was going to be difficult. His mother wasn't going to give up easily, and neither was he. But he had made his choice, and no matter how hard it got, he was going to protect the family he had built. Tomorrow would be another day, and it would bring new challenges. But for now, as he stepped inside to find Tieu Lac waiting for him, he felt a quiet sense of relief. He was home, and no matter what happened next, he would face it with her by his side. In today's episode, the CEO faces the growing tension with his mother after choosing to stand by Tieu Lac and their baby. Despite his mother's disapproval, he is determined to protect the life he's building with Tieu Lac. The confrontation with his mother intensifies as she challenges his decisions, trying to force him to prioritize the family business over his own happiness. Meanwhile, Tieu Lac is left to wait anxiously at home, unsure of what the future holds. Will the CEO continue to defy his mother's expectations, or will he cave under pressure? As the stakes rise, the CEO must decide what's truly important and what he's willing to sacrifice for the ones he loves. Stay tuned for more emotional twists and turns in their journey.